very much, Samson, for having me on your show. It's been a while.
That's right. So help us understand what the CDD and like-minded CSOs, including the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, mean when you say that this bill is unconstitutional. It does not pass muster.
Samson, again, thanks for having me on your show. And I'm quite, it's interesting that in this introduction, you have mentioned the Human Rights Commission. I'm quite delighted to hear you mention it, because in this debate, as it has unfolded, it appears that we have taken our human rights education on this matter, not from the expert constitutional body charged with human rights education and enforcement, which is right, but from the proponents of the bill. We have allowed, and I think the media is highly complicit in this, we have allowed definitions of what constitutes human right and what does not to be led by Mr. Sam George, Mr. Fuamini, and the likes, neither of whom I know to be human rights experts, and certainly not to have expertise on human rights that supersedes what Shraj has. Shraj has featured very little in this debate. So I find it actually, I'm gladdened that at least you have acknowledged that Shraj too, not just a bunch of 18 professors or intellectuals or however you call us, or not just CDD. But let me begin, by putting this in context. I think one of the things that has happened in this conversation is really a mischaracterization, grotesque mischaracterization of what this bill is and is not. When I listen even to the Honorable Afenyo-Markin, he begins, he talks about the bill and then immediately transitions into conversations about pedophilia. This bill is not about adults having sex with children. That was already criminal. And if it was about that, the more culpable group would be largely heterosexuals, right? So if you look at the defilement cases, if you look at teenage pregnancy in this country, we know that those are largely heterosexual cases. So it's not about pedophilia or defilement. It's not about rape. Rape is already criminalized. And if you have non-consensual sex with somebody, whether you are homosexual or heterosexual, it is rape. It is punishable under the law, as it must be. It is not about same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage is already not allowed under our law, and you cannot do it. In fact, if you're married under the ordinance, I misspoke. I mean, same-sex marriage is already not allowed under our law, so this is not about same-sex marriage. Nobody is making a claim for same-sex marriage, right? And it is important to also note that this law is not emanating from anybody in the gay community. The Ghanaian gay community has not asked for anything. They are sitting there somewhere, and some people bring a bill. So what this bill is seeking to do is essentially homogenize a certain sexual orientation that we in the majority possess. And the fact that a small minority in our population may not possess the same sexual orientation or may not exhibit the same sexual orientation has become for us something we can't live with. And therefore, the majority is trying to homogenize one form of sexual orientation and impose it on everybody else. I think what we are seeing in this bill is a lack of appreciation of just some humility about the fact that we do not know certain things about nature and about life. We do not know why certain people are homosexual and others in the majority may not be. We do not know why a small population of a small proportion of the population may end up being gay. But instead of looking at this issue and accepting with some intellectual honesty that we don't know, we are rather trying to criminalize an identity that we don't understand. So this is what I want to set as the context, what this bill is not about. Now, in terms of the Constitution, we at CDD certainly have looked at this bill, and we've made our views known to the Commission, to the Committee of Parliament right from the beginning. There are two angles at which we look at the constitutionality question. One, if you take the bill as a whole, and when we talk about the bill, it's important to understand that the bill has multiple parts, many different parts. And usually we just lump all of them and say the bill, the bill. It's important when we get to the human rights context to actually put the bill, just take the bill apart and look at its provisions. But let's take it as a whole. When you take the bill as a whole, we believe it offends the Constitution because it violates one of the constitutional provisions designed to safeguard some separation of powers here between what kind of a bill the executive may propose and what kind of a bill Parliament through a private member may propose. So under Article 108, the Constitution makes clear that unless a bill is introduced by or on behalf of the President, Parliament shall not proceed on it if it has certain kinds of fiscal effects, if it has certain effects on public funds and the like, right? So we have, from the beginning, taken the position that while we have been very supportive from the beginning on the idea of private members' bills, we think it's a great idea for private members in Parliament to be able to sponsor bills so that if the executive is not acting to solve a certain public problem, that at least private members of Parliament can take initiative. So the principle of private members' bill we support. However, the Constitution imposes certain constraints on what you can do with a private members' bill and what you cannot. And we've taken the position that this bill is not the kind of bill that a private member is allowed to introduce and that Parliament is allowed to pass because of the nature of the effects that it has on the public treasury. So that's the first position.
Yes, on the first issue, the President has already rejected or declined to assent 2 bills, or 3 so far, on the basis of the argument you make. But,
precisely.
But this bill does not require the setting up of any offices or anything of the sort. So how do you explain how public finances should be committed?
There's a division of labor that the Constitution erects or installs between when it comes to money matters and who manages our spending and all of that. Parliament appropriates. The government presents its budget proposals to Parliament. Parliament examines them, has hearings, budget hearings, and then it appropriates. From that period on, it is the duty and the prerogative of the executive to spend, to make expenditures out of the appropriated funds and account for it through Auditor General's reports and the like. Now, the scheme that 108 sets up, which is not new to Ghana, by the way, it comes out of our Westminster tradition, is that you do not allow a private member to micromanage the way government spends its funds that have been appropriated already. So one of the ways to prevent that is that in the course of the year, outside of the appropriations framework, you do not allow a private member in Parliament to begin to impose unfunded mandates on the executive, to begin to say, spend your money on this, spend money on that, do this.
My question is that you demonstrate to us how public funds will be involved here.
Absolutely. I mean, you are asking midstream, outside the appropriations framework, you are asking the government, you are criminalizing a whole new range of conduct through private members' bill. You're asking law enforcement to go and arrest a whole number of people. Our budgets for the police are determined already. You are asking the prisons establishment to incarcerate a whole number of people as a result of this. And so this is the kind of effect that it's going to have. And it's going to have it outside of the appropriations framework.
If the law were to be interpreted this way, could there ever be a private member's bill?
Of course, absolutely.
The president assented to the witchcraft bill. People will be arrested for calling people witches, and they will be prosecuted. It's government spending.
If the president assented to it, we would say that it's wrongful. It doesn't make it. It doesn't. We would insist that it's also unconstitutional. There is an appropriate, and in fact, it is not strange that when you look at it, what Article 108 is really trying to say is to carve out the area of criminal legislation as more or less an area that government must take initiative in, because criminal legislation implicates the sovereign power of the government in a very exceptional way. So private members' bills can be used to do a lot of things: code of conduct for public officers, asset declaration, a number of things that will not involve, implicate, or draw in the state, criminal law enforcement or imprisonment functions and all of those things. But when you are in the realm of criminal law, you cannot avoid imposing these kinds of unfunded mandate obligations of the state. So that's how we have looked at the bill as a whole. That's on the one side. Then when you take the bill apart into its constituent parts, and it has multiple parts, right? We know that the proponents of the bill have taken advantage of the fact that most of us are not going to take our time to read the bill. And we know most people haven't, including most people who vociferously oppose it, haven't taken the chance to read the bill. But the bill does a lot of things. I've told you the things that are already criminalized, and therefore the bill doesn't really add anything if it says, except that even where, for example, the bill tries to give more clarity to the existing law on natural carnal knowledge, you may not have certain kinds of sex, right? You may not have certain kinds of sex even if it's consensual. But those kinds of sex you may not have, the bill limits largely only to LGBTQ people. So in a very funny way, you have a sexual conduct that is supposed to be unnatural, is supposed to be abhorrent, and yet heterosexuals can engage in that sexual conduct under this bill, but homosexuals cannot. So clearly, what is the point of it? If what is the offensive and what is unnatural is a sex act, then why discriminate as to whose conduct is criminal and whose conduct is not? It should be equally criminal done by LGBT people or done by heterosexuals. But that is only one way in which the bill affects conduct. What is more interesting, actually, is that the bill also criminalizes identity itself. So normally we use criminal laws to attack acts, not status or identity. So here you have a situation where the bill says merely because you say you are gay, merely because you hold yourself out as a gay person, that itself is criminal. And then it proceeds also talking about things like public display of affection. We have a culture here in Ghana, long-standing, where same-sex friends, men and men, women and women, hold hands, put their hands around their shoulders and walk in public. We've done it as children, we've done it in school, it is part, in fact, sometimes when visitors come to Ghana, the thing they find amusing is how Ghanaians same-sex friends can show affection like that in public. Under this bill, that puts you immediately under suspicion that you are a gay person. And so you wonder, who is importing a foreign culture here? How is it that something that we have lived with, right? Hand-holding. Now, very soon under this bill, if you find that in your neighborhood, when we're kids, how many neighborhoods, in how many homes did we have young men having their own rooms? Neighborhood boys had usually some room, one fortunate neighborhood boy who had his little crib. That's where all the boys would hang out, and sometimes they would sleep together on the bed. Same-sex friends, not having sex, not having anything, just friends. Now, these kinds of things that we have had in our society for a long time will put you again under suspicion of being a gay person, and that is criminal.
So
and even things like, I'll finish on this point. So I'm just giving you examples because it's one thing to look at the bill as a whole from a 108 perspective, and it's another thing to also look at the bill in its separate parts from the human rights perspective. And when you look at the bill that way, so many of its provisions are offensive. Okay. So you also have a situation. Now I'll give you my last example of this on this point.
Thank you.
So I've spoken about how it criminalizes just mere identity without reference to conduct, how it criminalizes certain conduct that are deemed unnatural or offensive only if they are undertaken by homosexuals, not by heterosexuals, how it criminalizes innocuous acts that we have always had in our society, hand-holding, putting your hands around your friend's shoulders, walking in the street, now puts you under suspicion of being homosexual. And then, the more bizarre one is that even if you advocate for a change in the legal status of gay persons, so assuming that this bill passes, right, and then we as CDD, consistent with the values of the organization, consistent with our human rights posture on this bill, continue to advocate a repeal of this bill because we deem it offensive, we deem it a violation of human rights. We continue to advocate it. We become advocates of the human rights of the LGBT community, not even the Constitution.
All right.
Even the Constitution can be changed.
Okay.
Even the Constitution, the supreme law of the land can be changed.
All right.
This bill, advocacy of the kind intended to do away with this obnoxious legislation will actually expose one to the danger of arrest.
Right, that's what's been described as a reintroduction of criminal libel. Now, Prof, thank you.
On multiple fronts, this bill is unconstitutional as a whole and in the parts in which I've broken it down into.
I like your 30 seconds response to this quickly for me. You are talking about gay community. How can we say that in a country where Section 104(1)(b) of our Criminal Offences Act, Act 29, prohibits unnatural carnal knowledge, that is homosexuality. I appreciate that does not prohibit lesbianism, but it prohibits homosexuality. How can we even say gay community?
It prohibits sodomy. What it prohibits is, as it's been understood, it promises it prohibits a certain kind of sex, right? And we have come to understand it as prohibiting or prescribing sodomy or anal sex, right? That is not conduct that is engaged in exclusively by homosexuals.
And unnatural carnal knowledge at common law is defined as penile penetration of anything other than the vagina.
Well, exactly. So if a man, if a boyfriend has anal sex with a girlfriend, is that homosexual? These are heterosexuals doing it, right? If a husband has anal sex with a wife, these are heterosexuals doing it. And these things occur. We know that these things occur.
Okay.
So again, it is not something that is exclusively confined to the community you would call the homosexual community. If you focus on the act,
right,
then the acts that we say are in violation are acts that are gender neutral, are sexual orientation neutral.
Thank you. What do you say to the proponents who say that this bill is simply a consolidation of existing laws, that You refer to the Marriages Act. It defines what we mean by marriage: man to woman, woman to man, nothing else. They say this is what they have put in the bill. When you look at this bill, they are talking also about questions of adoption. They say for certain reasons you cannot adopt, which is already in our existing statutes. They refer you to Article 39, which says, and let me read quickly Article 39. 39 says the state shall, subject to availability, the state, subject to clause 2 of this article, the state shall take steps to encourage the integration of appropriate customary values into the fabric of national life through formal and informal education and the conscious introduction of cultural dimensions to relevant aspects of national planning. The state shall ensure that appropriate customary and cultural values are adopted and developed as an integral part of the growing needs of the society as a whole, and in particular that the traditional practices which are injurious to the health and well-being of the person are abolished. They say this is what they are simply doing.
Let me respond to the points you have raised, which are interesting. One, that this is just consolidating existing law. It is not. I mean, existing law does not prescribe holding of hands by same-sex friends. It doesn't prescribe advocacy to change an existing law, that you think is offensive. It doesn't prescribe being a gay person, right? Existing law prescribes certain acts. And those acts that are prescribed as to all persons, regardless of what your sexual orientation is. Unnatural carnal knowledge, as we have come to understand it, is sodomy, anal sex. Whoever does it is offends that provision. This law, however, for example, using the unnatural carnal knowledge example, that becomes now something that only if homosexuals did it, then it's offensive, but heterosexuals can. So it discriminates. Then, of course, I've told you all the new things this bill introduced. Now, let me take those two public institutions you mentioned, adoption and marriage. It's very important for us to understand this distinction.
And Prof, I need to summarize this in a minute for me.
Sure, I will. And because people like to muddy the waters by bringing in these two things. Adoption and marriage are public institutions. They are creatures of law, right? Your marriage is not recognized outside of the legal framework because it's a public institution. You need the blessing of the state for a marriage to be a marriage under our law, right? You need the state's involvement for adoption, for you to have adoption privileges. So what the state creates, the state can reasonably regulate. Absolutely. The state can regulate marriage as it does in every jurisdiction, and the state can regulate adoption. What we are talking about here is the state regulating private consensual sex and private consensual romantic relationships. Those are not things that the state created for us. Those are very natural things, like sleep, right? Those are very natural things that as you exist as a human being, you will fall in love, you will fall out of love, you will have sex if you want, you may not have sex, but these are private things that consenting adults can do. It's not marriage and it's not adoption. So when the state extends its long hand, which it is entitled to, extends it from adoption and from marriage into the private bedrooms and the private spaces of people, that is an overreach. That is a difference.
Thank you very much, Prof.
And the last one is the culture point. I need to meet your point about culture. What you read to me, that's not saying the directive principles of state policy, right? It's not saying that we must impose a monolithic culture on all Ghanaians or cultural preference or cultural practice on all Ghanaians by criminal law. It says, and we have to be careful not to read it outside the context of Chapter 5's provisions on culture, that individuals have a right to manifest their own culture. There is no monolithic Ghanaian culture that we all must subscribe to. We all cannot speak with an American accent.
Okay.
We all cannot be forced to wear cloth to funeral, those kinds of things. So the rights regarding culture are for us as individuals. What the state is, however, saying is that the state, we must be encouraged as Ghanaians to exhibit Ghanaian culture.
Thank you, Prof.
And we do that by saying Friday, wear Ghanaian cloth and all of those things. That's how
Right.
we do it.
Thank you very much.